Buckle your seatbelts, fitness and health coaches. Why the psychology for health and fitness professionals today? Well, you're going to love exercise, right? Generally, we do. And that's why we start what we do. And you crave it. And most of your clients don't. We're so far off from clueless or from understanding what that feels like to be awkward, uncomfortable, and feel out of place that we simply can't relate. We've got to earn and learn our empathy. Why I hate exercise, my summer report. It's the truth for too many of us. Since my beginnings in fitness 38 years ago, the statistics, unfortunately, about obesity and who is active enough to improve their health, let alone their fitness, it has not changed. That has not changed. There's still too few of us exercising enough. And this interview episode dives into that psychology for health and fitness professionals, and as it's been discovered by another fitness professional who finally spent so many years knowing the kinesiology of physiology, as so many of us do, but finally coming to the revelation that he didn't understand as well as he wished to, the psychology of change. Mike Kelly is my guest today. He and I are in the same wavelength as I had that revelation 30 years ago and went back to school for my master's after 9 months out, realizing this was not just a below the shoulders gig. And if we were going to change and make a huge impact, not just on the population, but on the fitness industry, that's where the work began. So behavior change is hard. And if you know that all too well, say you've seen your detailed exercise prescription fall by the wayside and clients fall off the bandwagon, you'll find a great deal of support inside the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist course. You have access to expert interviews there, like Dr. Joan Rosenberg, as we talk about the science of change. Mindy Gorman-Plutzer, talking about eating disorders, Dr. Sandi Scheinbaum, and more, talking about the scope of practice in coaching. How do you get to the real underlying issue for someone else? Not wishing it, not making them change, not hoping they will, but actually asking the right questions to find out if indeed they want to change, not if they simply want the changes. These experts discuss the art and the science of coaching change within scope of practice and issues like disordered eating, self-sabotage, emotional eating, and past failures that haunt your clients. These complementary expert interviews are a professional development extra for the specialist course and a priceless resource for improving the coaching skills you use daily. We're adding to that list on a monthly basis. Coming up shortly, gut health is a brand new one. Learn more about the Flipping 50 Specialist in the link in our show notes. And now I can't wait to introduce you to my guest today. You will hear us step on each other's toes just a little bit as I interject and help clarify what you as a listener, if you've been here for a minute, already know, and catch Mike in what I think is planting seeds that maybe unnecessarily and definitely unintentionally take us in the wrong direction if we're not careful. And it's all too easy for you and I to do the same. So here we go. Mike Kelly, he says he has some contrarian views related to health and fitness developed over 40 years in fitness. And I think you'll agree they are right in alignment with what we preach at Flipping 50. So maybe not so contrarian to our advice here. He's been a personal trainer, a university level varsity strength and conditioning coach, expert legal fitness witness, and a master trainer, meaning he trains other fitness professionals. Despite knowing the body extremely well from an anatomical perspective, he went back to school 5 years ago to become Queen's University's oldest psychology grad in the spring of 2020. Knowledge, he says, has allowed him to expand his understanding of the connection between psychology and the physiology, or as we know it, the mind body connection. He adopted the moniker, the cynical trainer, which he uses on social media, and we'll find out what that's all about. Mike, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Okay, before we jump into the real guts and topic of this conversation, let's talk about why you're here. What got you into providing health and fitness as a career? So we were just in the green room and I'm privy to knowing what your background is, but why fitness? How did that happen? And 40 years ago when, it wasn't necessarily yet the popular thing.
Yeah, I looked old in my old Brooks running shorts, I'll tell you. It's actually coming up in 45 years, but, I'll be honest, selfish reasons. I played varsity tennis, and that was my foray into it. Now, granted, back then, there were very few fit tennis players. That didn't start for a decade or so later where people put the emphasis on that. But I slowly merged from that at the club I was teaching at to personal training. And I'm very social. I love talking to people. It benefits me. At the end of the day, all humans are selfish. We do things that make us feel good, and that makes me feel good. From that point of actually starting to train people individually and learn more about the body and people, I thought this is working okay, but I'm only in the hundreds of people. So that's a pretty small microcosm of the world. So how can I extend that? And I took that by then switching into or adding on to it, augmenting the teaching aspect, where I could teach and certify personal trainers and theoretically pass on some of my passions and beliefs and so on, that they could then transfer onto hundreds of their clients. So by extension, I'd be reaching hundreds of thousands of people. And from that, it just became, again, a bit of a selfish thing. And that, ironically, despite the title we may talk about later on, I do exercise. In fact, I'm passionate about it. And it's probably the most paramount thing we can think about doing to keep us healthy and well and active. I do the personal training because it almost forces me to stay functionally fit. Otherwise, I'd be somewhat hypocritical talking to people, telling them how to do things, yet not following it myself. So I'll continue to do that until I'm no longer able to move.
Walking the talk. Fantastic. Okay. So you've kind of taken us through what made you decide to do this in the first place and why you're still here. Now we have to address, I think, what you've hinted at. Your social media tag is the cynical trainer. Why that choice? Tell us what that means to you.
On a broad basis, too much of any good thing in the world is a bad thing. But sometimes too little of something is also a bad thing. And that's everything in life. Too much water is a bad thing. Too little water is a bad thing. I think everybody out there on the planet that's, cognitive ability is cynical at some points in their life, meaning you have to ask questions. If we don't ask questions, the world would, completely run amok, including how governments function. We have to challenge people. So I have a cynical sense of a couple of areas related to the fitness world. Let me break them down quickly. The first one is that I'm cynical about the fact that people blindly put too much faith in governments, meaning especially those that have gotten higher on the age curve. They believe the government's going to be there for them. And the sad part is government can't look after itself properly. How the hell are they going to look after you when you start falling into disrepair? The second aspect of that first part is a pharmaceutical machine. And although it starts out with good intentions, meaning you have somebody very creative coming up with something, trying to find a solution to a bad problem, ultimately, I think money tends to rear its ugly head, and that falls into the system in a negative way. Lastly, I'm cynical about how people just fall on board so quickly with the get fit quick schemes. You see it everywhere, from the latest fitness equipment gadgets out there, being demonstrated by people that look so incredibly fit, You think, well, I'll get this equipment. Now, the irony, by the way, is that those new pieces of fitness equipment that come on the market, they haven't been used by the fitness models that are demonstrating them. They're too new. The fit models were already fit before they jumped on that equipment. And people just don't understand the mechanics, the physics of exercise machines. The variety is out there because humans get bored. But the reality is you don't need a whole lot to push your body properly. But again, when people are in disrepair and on, especially at 3 a.m. when an infomercial is on, they very quickly fall into these traps whereby, you can burn 3 times the amount of calories with this machine as opposed to this machine. Okay, sign me up. And the reality is that people don't last long on these at all, and they end up hanging clothes on these machines. So I generally applaud people like yourself for promoting health and fitness, but sadly, you and I are really affecting people who are already somewhat getting it. They get the idea of fitness, and it's such a small microcosm, Deborah. When you look at a large fitness club with 5 or 10,000 people, that's such a small microcosm of the cities that these clubs are in. The majority of people, in fact, it's nearly 250 million with a B in North America alone that are considered overweight or obese. It's scary, and it's only getting worse.
That's exactly right. So, 40 years ago, when I initially was a student changing a major to physical education, the statistics were, as they still are today, what's worse is many of them are children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so true. So let's also keep in mind, we're speaking to fitness professionals and health pros
Sure.
that we mentor here with marketing and sales strategies, as well as how do we coach and how do we have a deeper penetration. So our larger message is reaching out to them and without the cynical moniker, course correcting for the fitness industry so that we are sending the correct message and we're correcting some of the blindly following position statements as well. Yeah, love it. All right. You start off, and everybody heard that you feel you're very contrarian. What is it that you feel is so contrarian views to exercise? And who do you mean that you're contrarian to?
Okay. Let me frame it this way first. I'll ask you a question, if I may.
Sure.
Have you ever tried to change someone's opinion or belief that was different than yours?
Well, I'm in a personal relationship, so of course, yes.
There you go. I won't ask you what the end result was, but generally speaking, it's extremely difficult.
Still not speaking to me. No.
Okay. Well, I might give you some insight to that. But very quickly, by the way, I although I've been in fitness and sports and fitness and health and so on related things for a long time, knowledge is powerful if you get to use it. So I went back to school. And
yes.
The reason I went back to school is very simply that when I was training people, and it doesn't matter if they were on an athletic world class level or a mom and pop level, the majority of my clients over time, they were fine when they were under my tutelage and, even a week off. But for example, I was a trainer here in Ottawa, Canada, at the U.S. Embassy for 7 years. And I would train people who were there under contract for 3 years. And they very quickly reached their goals, most cases, and they were fine. But when they left their contracts at the end of 3 years to get back to the US or whatnot, I would get messages from a number of them over the years saying, "Oh, Mike, what do? I've fallen into disrepair again, or I've fallen off the wagon that you had me on." And it dawned on me, the reason for this, it's all about brain chemistry. So I was missing, although, I teach anatomy and so on, and proper movements and planes of movement, et cetera, I was missing that component. So at the tender age of, how old was I? I don't know, 59 or 60 or something. I went back to Queen's University, and last spring of 2020, I became their oldest psychology graduate. And it's from there that it's filled in a lot of the blanks, not only for my clientele, but for myself, meaning learning about myself. So I've learned quite a bit into how to help people deal with things. And one of them is, when you're trying to change someone, forget it. You can change yourself and or provide context to a person who's of cognitive abilities to take information and dissect it and say to themselves, That's scientific information. It makes sense to me. I get it. Oh my God. Now, the reason it's so hard to make that change is that we as humans all have developed over the years biases and beliefs. These are literally hardwired into our brains. I won't get into it in an in-depth analysis or whatnot, talking about axons and so on, but the reality is it's hard when we're conscious to change belief systems that we've been working on for so many years, decades in some cases. And one of those aspects is exercise. So I don't want you to feel insulted when I say this. You and I are in the fitness business. We get it. We know we need to do it. The majority of people in the fitness industry believe that they love doing exercise. I won't put you on the spot, Deborah, to ask if you do or not. Again, because I have a 2-day course that I run. It's an accredited course. It's done corporately for some of the large fitness gyms up here in Canada, like Good Life and Movati, but I also run it publicly. And the purpose of that 2-day course is to provide people with the knowledge and the tools that they can use to help better understand why is it exercise is so challenging for people to do. And the reason is simple. It's the brain. But again, you have to provide the context to allow people to make the decision. So at the start of the course, I do ask the question of everybody attending. Most of them are health and fitness professionals. Some are just general laymen. But I say, do you love doing exercise? Guess what? Everyone says yes. The numbers at the end of the course are normally 100% reversed. So what's the purpose of doing that? Well, number one, it creates empathy. So if you're a health and fitness professional, empathy is something subconscious to us. We can fake it. We can put on a facade. But if you don't truly believe in what you're speaking to and how you're going to help a clientele or whatnot, you're not going to give your best abilities to them. And you're certainly not going to build up good rapport, like a very deep level of rapport with people, which is what personal training is all about. So the course helps people get a better empathy to see how incredibly hard it is to be a functionally healthy / fit human. It's incredibly hard. Like, give yourself a pat on the back for being one of the very small percentile on the planet that fits in that category. It's incredibly hard. And,
okay, stop.
Yeah.
Pause a second. All right. So I'm going to argue that point, and I'm going to argue the point that if you continue to repeat, it's incredibly hard, you are creating a message to yourself that creates a thought, and a repeated thought is where our beliefs come from. So,
Agreed.
I mean, we've got to take a hard look at that. We've seen a lot of support in meditation, in intentional meditation, and the use of placebo for changing the emotion, which then can change a thought, which then can change a belief and change the actions. So there is some support for that. I mean, you and I are on the same page, my friend. So I majored 39 years ago in exercise psychology. So it's always been about above the shoulders for me first, because I saw right away in 1984, we're not getting this. It's not working. This is not about kettlebell swings and medicine ball throws or which one is better. It's about so much more. But come back to me with that. So when you keep saying it's hard, it's incredibly hard, I think you're spewing a message that has a backward result.
You can always look at it that way. Now, the reality is, of the people that I train as new trainers, the average age is just over 21. These are individuals, in essence, at their peak abilities from a physiological aspect.
But I don't think it matters how old someone is.
Well, they haven't, from an empathy aspect, Deborah, they haven't experienced what osteoarthritis is, as one of many examples.
Back up 1 second. Let me clarify. So you're talking about the master training that you're doing with fitness professionals when you say 21-year-olds.
Certifying them, correct.
Yes. Yeah, correct. Okay.
Now, obviously, there are a lot of trainers out there that are, older than their 20s or in their 50s,
and that's
50s,
who you're
60s.
talking to, Mike. We're talking to women between 45 and 70 who are trainers themselves.
Now, the older we get, the harder it is to change a belief system. And that's just a reality. You can say to yourself consciously, I get it. my amygdala is working this way and so on, etc. But from a subconscious perspective, it's going to fall back to how we're wired and how we're used to doing things, our belief systems,
Right.
and so on.
Habit gravity, we call that around these
Yeah.
parts.
And
And
as I say, more
harder
knowledge.
doesn't
Mhm.
mean not doable.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Right.
And that's why I say when I present the hurdles to allow the context to be understood, I also give alternatives to how the people are currently doing things. So I'll answer one thing. The contrarian view I have about exercise, you're not going to like this. Most people tend to set the bar too high. What do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, I was a varsity coach for a women's university hockey team here in Ottawa. And again, the average age is in early 20s. They're all very good. They were all extremely fit. And it was really enjoyable training them. But when they hit into their 40s, guess what? From a subconscious aspect, they're still going to feel like they have the abilities that they had when they were in their 20s. So when they're playing pickup hockey in their 40s in a couple of decades, and that puck goes down to the end of the ice, their brain is not going to think, you've aged 2 decades and things aren't as good as they were physiologically. It doesn't matter. You were a good hockey player. You push yourself as hard as you can. And of course, what happens? Injuries ensue, and even worse.
Right.
And the reality is that then they start to fall into that trap of the healing aspect. Meaning there's just too many things, as much as I do, that the physiological aspect, we just don't heal about the same ways we used to. It takes longer. But again, from a subconscious perspective, the brain isn't thinking that way because we're not wired that way. So I tend to tell a lot of my clients, I'll give you an example. If you walk a country mile in 25 minutes and you're just comfortable doing that, get to a point where you can do that for 2 weeks straight. Your brain, your cardiovascular system will adapt, homeostasis, you'll be fine. And you'll heal well through, human growth hormone and so on, and your good deep sleep cycles, hopefully, that you're getting afterwards. But what you want to then do is knock off an entire 5 to 10 seconds off that 25 minutes over the next 2 weeks that you do it. That's not how people work. People say, oh my God, 25 minutes is so terrible. I used to do this in 12 minutes. I'm going to push myself. I'm going to go out today for a personal best at, I'm in my 50s or whatnot. I'm going to push myself. And yes, they'll do it, but they will pay the price and they'll end up, in many cases, injuring themselves, maybe down to the periosteum on the bone, and it's a hard injury to recover from. It just takes longer and it gets harder. Then they fall into the trap of disrepair, and then it's easy to make excuses and not do things at all. So I'm more about taking your clients through a longer training pattern. For example, what do we say? 1 to 2 pounds a week. No, I'm sorry. That's craziness. It's too much of an ask for someone who has taken years to put on the extra 30 pounds to think that it's okay for the brain to adapt to 1 to 2 pounds a week. It doesn't
And
work well.
ideally, we have zero control over that. So to my audience, we already know we're women in menopause have no control over that. So until we balance hormones and use non-scale victories and measures of are we going in the right direction, the weight won't come off. We have no control. So it's really actionable things. And I'm sure you promote that as well. But yes, people want to go for the scale, but if we can pull them back to what makes that happen, our success rate is far better.
Agreed 100%. And I'm surrounded by estrogen, by the way. My wife of 35 years, my daughter, our 2 female dogs. Most of my clients are females. I am so lucky physiologically to have been popped out on this planet as a male. There's a lot more challenges hormonally speaking. I probably know more about the female hormonal system than the male system. But, you hit perimenopause and wow, there's a lot of wake-up calls that happen. So you have to plan. And that's another general thing I tend to preach about is that people don't plan to fail. They fail to plan.
Correct.
And if you don't have the knowledge base of resources of, I know you're disagreeing with me about how hard it is, but as we do get older, I can, it would take me time though. It would take me context to explain that it is harder, but that's okay. There's
It
nothing
is
wrong with that.
it is different.
It's different.
We make it harder, and I say
Sure.
collectively, we in the fitness industry have made it harder.
Mm-hmm.
And we have those beliefs of what exercise should be,
Sure.
and it being a quota base as opposed to like, how do you feel? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you
Definitely.
sleeping? And what are you doing to support your muscle protein synthesis at this point in your life? There are a lot of things that I do believe we make it harder. And
Mm-hmm.
I will totally agree with you that the people who need us most believe that it's hard. And I flip that very often in
Mm-hmm.
that being sick is far harder.
Oh, sure. Definitely. I'm so lucky in that I think I had a cold 15 years ago, and I literally just got a cold 2 weeks ago. I thought I was dying.
Right.
Now, and the reason I got it, I went to this convocation, which was delayed for 2 years, and I was standing around 2,000 very young people, and I was one of a dozen people in the entire audience wearing a mask. So maybe it was psychosomatic, but nonetheless, I came back, I got a cold. It wasn't
Hmm.
COVID, but I got a cold. And I do my maintenance every day, and I preach to my clients to a degree that if you want to maintain good functional form and so on, and immune system indirectly, you need to do maintenance on a daily basis, meaning keep moving and challenging. And one of my maintenance items is that I do push-ups. I do a lot of body weight exercises because it's my gym that's always with me. I've got no excuses. Well, when I get down from an immune system perspective and I stop doing things for even a couple of days, I feel it when I come back and I'm
Mm.
redoing things. So it's another challenge. But if you
Mhm.
understand it and can plan for it, it's not insurmountable. And that's the whole thing. So again, it comes back to knowledge is powerful if you know what to do with it.
Right.
But
And because you were that fit and had been doing that maintenance, you
sure,
got over that cold far faster. And I think that
that's
too is an important point
mhm.
for clients to point out that no, you're not skipping a workout. No, you shouldn't feel guilty. Your body's workout right now is the healing and the immune boost that needs to happen for that cold, that virus, or that COVID. And you're stronger going into it, and you'll be stronger as you come out of it.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask you. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit. We talked about the statistics. What are your thoughts on the current obesity levels? Why? Why do you think, Mike, we have failed miserably? And I say that, we in the fitness industry, we've been at this for decades. There are
Wow,
more trainers and coaches right now than ever.
you've hit the nail on the head so hard. Here's my take on it. Number one, it is complex.
Mm.
It is so complex. There's so much information out there that I believe it's overwhelming to people. It might be better for a lot of people to disseminate from smaller sources of information than all. If you type something in about how to lose weight on the internet, how many hits do you get?
Oh my God.
It's craziness. So how do you delineate what's going to be useful to you? Because not everyone is the same. First of all, your answer is absolutely correct. We've got all this technology from science, from physiologically, let alone all the toys and exercise, let alone all the trainers with good ambition and intention and so on. But the reality is obesity is it's skyrocketing. And by the way, statistics that we look at, you and I look at, they're typically a year or so behind when the surveys are tabulated.
Right.
I'm very confident that the next large stat group that I see coming out, probably in a year or so, is going to see such a rocketing exponential rise in
Mm.
obesity, all because of COVID and the
Right.
sedentarism that's taken place. But at the end of the day, some people aren't going to like what I'm going to say. I I do feel, and I believe the things that are not taken well by people, as long as you present them properly, as charismatically as you can, diplomatically with science behind it,
Okay,
people
hold on.
understand it better. Yes.
So you preclude these things that you're about to say by saying you're not going to like this. You are planting the seed in my brain that I won't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
you need it.
I forgot your audience. And I forgot your audience is more fitness professionals, so including yourself. So this probably doesn't apply. The following applies to those that are unhealthy. I feel, and again, science supports a lot of this, that those that are unhealthy from a physical standpoint, including obesity or morbid obesity or whatnot, it's self-induced. It's self-induced. And our healthcare system here in Canada, I suspect it's similar in the US, it's overwhelmed. I've had a number of doctors, physicians as clients who have turned into friends and so on over the years. And the average physician up here has anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 patients. I go, what? How can you have 2,000 or 3,000 patients? Like, how can you have any bedside manner? It's craziness. You can't. But it's just because our system is overwhelmed. I'm trying, I don't go to the doctor very often, but I'm trying to see a dermatologist for a scar I have in my back. And it's a 6-month wait period that I've got to get a phone call from the people that my GP referred them to. That's what our healthcare system is like.
Yeah.
So it's very good once you get in it. But again, if you're thinking the healthcare system is going to be there for you as you start to not look after yourself and stop promoting movement, which the body requires, you're going to fall into the trap. And once you've fallen into that trap, it's a slippery slope to get up.
Agreed.
So, and then there's so many other variables, including technology. When I was growing up, my parents said, get outside, come back at 5:00 for dinner. And at the age of 5, I was out on my tricycle, on my 2-wheel bicycle, biking around the city. My God, that would never happen these days.
This is true.
Without an escort.
And sadly, I wouldn't want it to at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let alone technology that has just, everywhere for the simplicity of a remote control. When I grew up watching black and white TV, I'm not boasting. I'm just talking about the realities that technology does change how we move and or not. And, I could blame, if I was going to put blame, in so many areas from not only government, but the education system. Up here in Canada, it's somewhat anti-movement for fear of liabilities of injuries and so on.
Ugh.
You don't have to look very far to see from a planning perspective why this has happened. And, I don't love doing exercise. I've been very upfront about that, yet I do it more than most people. I do some bizarre things, like from a strength perspective. I'm very fortunate. But then again, I don't set the bar higher than I can. So I'm not shooting for a 6-pack. I could get a 6-pack, but I'd have to be in the gym 6 days a week, and I'd have to start getting hangry by adjusting my diet. I love eating too much. So I'm very, very content with having a 5 3/4 pack. I can literally maintain with minimalist effort. In fact, that's my preferred exercise methodology, minimalist.
Right.
I do the exercise because I enjoy the eating in life. It's an enjoyment we all have, or hopefully get to have. I also love sports. If I don't do the exercise, I'm going to pay the price when I continue to try and play the sports.
So, Mike, I would love to kind of stop looking at maybe the psychology and then the what's wrong with the fitness industry and look at specifically when we do get someone who comes to us for help and they are obese, even morbidly obese, the strategies. I had a good friend and colleague of mine as I was teaching in kinesiology at Iowa State University. And Dr. Patty Akakakis, definitely Greek, and why we call him Patty and not the rest, loved to come on. And he shared on this podcast before about how we get it wrong. I think we feel so panicked. We have to show these people progress so we don't lose them. We go in, we go hard, we go fast because we want them to have the weight loss that will keep them. And from the research standpoint, they don't have the same endorphin hit from intense exercise. They really have to self-select. And we screw that up quite a bit. What are your thoughts and what have you seen?
Well, there's a lot of science around it. And I'm more of a, as opposed to an anecdotal thing, I'm more of an empirical kind of a person. It's not always 100% correct, but it gives me a little more sense of confidence. If you look at the famous The Biggest Loser show, which I used to enjoy watching when it first came out, a long time ago, but I think I lost interest after the fourth episode when it first came out. That being said, they ran a study from season 8 contestants. Yeah. And again, to jump fast forward as opposed to going through all the context I present in the course, every single one of the 16 contestants after a 5-year period had gone back to the original, if not heavier weight than they had originally entered the show with. Why? Yeah. Well, it comes back to, how we present this to our clientele. And my own general thought, I mentioned it before, is I feel that even as fitness health professionals, we set the bar too high. We set it based on parameters that have been set up. And some of these parameters are very old in their methodologies. When you look at percentiles for people, for example, I'm off topic for a second, but does it make any sense at all that as a person approaching 65, meaning myself, that I'm in the 95th percentile for 18-year-olds? Does it make any sense?
Well,
not really.
If you look at ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the reality is that the tests, the assessments were set up based on the masses, and the masses, sadly, as we all know, they're not in that great a shape.
Right.
So it's not that difficult to actually move across a bar if that's your drive. And that's what mine is, especially when I was in the sports mode. But for many patients, or not patients, but clientele, to tell them that, listen, the industry says we should target 1 to 2 pounds a week. That might happen early on. In fact, most of it's going to be water loss for the great degree. But when, the stuff hits the road, it doesn't come off as easily. Why? Because it's challenging more so than they were thinking about. And many of the health professionals or fitness professionals out there, they're going based on what they understand within their own bodies, many times subconsciously. You have to take a different tack. So my tack with clientele is to say, listen, here's the good news. You are 45 years old. We'll say for a rough example. Life expectancy wise, you have another 38 some years. That's if you do nothing right at all. Because the pharmaceutical, the medical industries, they'll keep you alive. You may not have a good quality of life, but you'll live into your early 80s. So if you're 45 now, you have so much time left on the planet. In fact, I still consider myself young, and I'm older than most of my clients. So if I consider myself young by definition or extension, you must be the young. So let's take a longer term approach to this, to changing how you do things. And when we take the longer term approach and are less immediately deliberate with, taking excess weight off and becoming more functionally strong and so on, your brain adapts to it on a more palatable basis. And that helps you get to levels progressively on a more consistent basis, meaning I'm all about sustainability. You can take just about anybody and turn them into a fairly functioning fit machine, given no genetics or systemic issues or whatnot, in a fairly short order period of time. But the reality of them staying at that level, I doubt it. Again, look at the Biggest Loser. They didn't have the same motivation of money when they were away from the show. They didn't have the support systems. They didn't have the specialized equipment. They didn't have the trainers, et cetera, et cetera. They fell back into their life ways. And that's where I think where the system failed them. Yeah. If that answers your question.
It totally does. I mean, we definitely explore it. And I think, we've got to look back over the last 35, 40 years and all of the things that contributed, right? As you said, it's collective. I mean, most recently, we've got the pandemic to look at or to blame. But, all that did was amplify what was already wrong, right? The convenience of being right there where the cupboard was, not having to exercise or go outside of your house, closing off exercise for those who were trying to do it. We made it really hard during the pandemic. And not that we didn't need to. I mean, we have to put health first before the fitness. But also, all those years ago when we went low fat, no fat, and we just
Yeah.
pumped things up and we've taught the wrong thing. And as you've mentioned, layer against layer of confusion now. Does somebody choose keto or paleo, or is vegan better? And it's incredibly hard to quote unquote eat healthy today and define that for an individual. So I think, we still are a bit of a hot mess. And if listeners, realize this, I think the best place to start is opening up the conversation.
Sure.
Being willing just to say, on your platforms or your timelines, I may not have all the answers, but I'd like to hear from you. What do you need most? What's your biggest challenge right now? What one small step would you like help with today? We'll find out a little bit more. And what really matters, I think, is hearing them express it in their words, their own words.
We have such a great job, meaning if you're fortunate enough to be in the fitness field.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the health field, because the health field, oh my God, you see people really at their worst.
Yeah.
We see people as precursors to that many times. So it's a little more easy to take. But I'm very fortunate to be in this job. And when I look at a lot of my clientele, I will tell you, the majority of them that I see, mid 50s, they're on 3 to 5 medications.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of those medications are actually side effect medications. And it generally takes about 6 months of a bit of a reset, mindset change, and different planning aspects and so on for many people to get off the majority of those pharmaceuticals. But it doesn't happen immediately. And this is where the brain aspect comes in. Humans come into this world with only 2 fears: the fear of falling, the fear of sounds. Every other fear is self-manifested. Some of my fears I laugh at when I think about how silly they are. I've got something called ichthyophobia. Do you know what that is, Deborah?
I do not.
It's a fear of fish. Like, what the hell? I was doing a triathlon once, and I thought some seaweed was a fish. I took a panic attack. I almost had to bail onto one of the kayaks. I ended up breaststroking the entire way. The good news there is that I've never passed so many bicycles in my life in a triathlon race. But I digress. A lot of the things that we have are self-manifested. We create these challenges for ourselves that, why? And part of it is connected to the fact that the brain wants instant gratification. Here's the thing. And again, I would need 2 days of your time to provide the context to have you really get on board with this, or have a good chance of. The reality is we do not get instant gratification from the act of doing the exercise. We get the gratification from many other things, but they are after the act of doing the challenging exercise, such as finishing from a self-esteem perspective, the aesthetics, the muscular tone, the improvement of our immune system, our general emotional calm sets, our basal metabolic rates, taking weight off, We get those after doing the exercise.
True. And I'm going to guess that a few of the listeners here are saying, no, I love that high that I get. And I also
I want to talk to them, Deborah.
I want to give them. Yeah, let me throw this out first.
Sure.
So here's what happens at midlife and older age. We actually have fewer of the receptor sites where those endorphins, serotonin, and dopamine sit. So even for those of you who are listening, who love to exercise, because most of the time that's why we get into this. We love it. We think it's a great way to spend every day, all day, and help others feel that feeling. But they don't have the ability. And there is research that I shared about a decade ago with Patty in a visit that those who have obesity don't experience that at all. And so we've got to, take into consideration, they're not going to have that feel good until definitely you're talking about after.
Bingo.
Okay. So you've hinted at this, and you've also hinted at we're using the word Senior is how you came in, and then olders because you listened to, and I will link to this in the show notes for listeners, but the most recent episode that I've done about ageism and whether we might any one of us might be more ageist than we think, and it's a great quiz. I subjected myself to it thinking I think I think I have to think about this a little bit harder in the words I use, the language I use, not only for myself but in my marketing messages. Tell me, as an older adult, how do you personally exercise if you ended this? And what are your goals for exercise and your motivation to stick with
Right.
it if you don't love it?
Well, as I say, I'm very fortunate. I don't have any major, I have a little bit of scoliosis. I have wear and tear, osteoarthritis. In the morning, I can't effectively close my hands for a number of reasons. But if we were on video right now, I would demonstrate to you, because I have no other reference other than myself to be 100% sure in. I would do a total fist, full body lift push-up and do a bunch of them, landing on a straight fist. I train that way. Now, here's the sad part. My belief is that those that are already fit get to stay fit easier than those trying to get fit.
Truth.
Because we have the capacity. We have more muscular tone than those that do not. So we can do more things to put our body through the paces that will give us the end results that we're looking for. So once we hit those goals, we can maintain them easier. So the way I do that personally, I love equipment. I teach about different types of equipment, how it moves, how you should maintain it, and so on, et cetera. But the ultimate gym in the world is the body. Once you get to a fit perspective, you can use isometrics like an L seat on the floor or in a Roman chair, or you can do different kinds of push-ups. And every day I do my pull-ups. I'm fortunate. I have a crossover gym here in my home. So I get to do those things. But even if I didn't, I would find ways to do it. Simply take a good, strong cotton strap, a martial arts strap, or a cotton robe belt, and throw it over a football post or a goal post, and grab the straps and do your pull-ups and slowly progress into them. But at the end of the day, because I don't like doing exercise, I do the most minimal amount possible. Now, some of your fitness professionals on the other end are saying, hypocrisy.
No, not the ones
you're
here.
going to kill our industry. But the reality is, my mindset is, no, you are going to have your clients for a longer period of time than you ever would have before if you change the narrative about what exercise is.
The moniker for Flipping 50, by the way, Mike, is exercise less and eat more. So you are already preaching to the choir.
All right, let me sing with you.
Yeah, exactly. So we know that if we're doing more, we won't lose weight. We will actually store fat based on the cortisol response that is much more negative for a woman in midlife than it's ever been for her before. The hard truth for many of our listeners is we love exercise and we have to hold ourselves back. Girlfriends, I know you're out there, right? So it's challenge. Between the ears, we believe more is better still, even ourselves. And we know we've got to beat down that response in someone who's about to be a client, ideally as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's called personal training. And, if you can get in and build a rapport up and really try to, not from a psychoanalysis aspect, but just try to understand the place that the person is currently in, you're going to be able to better appreciate how to help them change from that position. And a lot of the stuff I find when I go into large gyms, it's too cookie cutter, especially in the entry-level trainers. And of course, as they gain more knowledge over time, they get better with that. But generally speaking, here's the circuit. I'll take you through the circuit, do this 3 times a week and report back. We'll get on the scale, da-da-da-da-da-da. It doesn't work well. So it's too mechanical almost in nature, I find.
Yes.
The better trainers, the cream comes to the top. So I will share one other aspect I show with you, and this relates to the brain and how we can be self-motivated to do things. Sadly, many people as they start to fall off the curve of good fitness, they wait until they're told by someone in a white coat with a stethoscope that something bad has happened and or will happen very shortly. And that scares them. Next to self-gratification, the brain wants survivability. And I don't have the time to get into it. You don't have the time to have me talk about it. It takes about 2 hours, but I talk about how the brain deals with calorie restrictions and so on. But that being said, when you're looking at something that is scaring a person, that is a massive motivator. So what do I use? I use, other than science, to give them things in a palatable way. I show them things like ultrasound, which, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard the concept of ultrasound and you agree it's credible from a science technology perspective. So I use ultrasound to actually show people what their guts look like. I show them the various layers and the deep adipose tissue and so on. And then I show them from a health correlation perspective how that has shown in studies how it negatively correlates to cardiovascular risks and so on. It's a polite way, a less scary way, but it's still scary enough because of the science behind it to give people this minor wake-up call, as opposed to waiting another 3 months and then being told that they need an artery cleaned out or something. And that tends to work fairly well. And it's all very personal. I do the ultrasound scan. I give them the printout to look at, and they start thinking about it. And they research it. And then they come back, and it's their motivator, as opposed, again, to being told, sorry to tell you, you've got type 2 diabetes.
Yes. Okay. Mike, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
All right. Where's the best place for listeners to get more Mike?
Do they want that? Let's see. We Mean Fitness. It sounds like we mean business, but it's We Mean Fitness.
So, listeners, it is now up to you. So I'd love it if you'd leave your comments and or your questions below the show notes. And that will be fitnessmarketingmastery.com/psychology for health and fitness. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts about this, because there are some things that might have resonated knowing you're Flipping 50 fitness specialist. And for those of you who are newer to listening, some of it may have been indeed contrarian to your beliefs. And what are you waiting for? The world needs us now more than ever.